Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome once again to our weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. James Bridgers, who is the Chief of Public Health Services, as well as Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Program Administrator, Public Health, Emergency Preparedness and Response for the Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Earl Strader, our Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, is also joining us today, and a special guest this afternoon, Maryland Delegate Janelle Wilkins, who is the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. Members of the media, remember to use the chat during the Q&A portion of this presentation. And with that, good afternoon, Mr. County Executive.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. Before we begin, I just want to talk about the obvious tragedy in the world, what's going on in Turkey and Syria right now as a result of the massive losses from earthquakes. More than 20,000 people are now feared dead. I think last I saw, they confirmed almost 20,000 dead. And search and rescue efforts are still underway, and international aid is just beginning to help the tens of thousands of victims who've been left homeless and have lost everything. And they're not going to be going home again, which means there's a long-term crisis to replace the housing that used to exist there. I encourage all residents to support groups like the Syrian Red Crescent and the Turkish Red Crescent, which are affiliated with the American Red Cross. Any and all assistance is really needed there, and I hope people will open up their hearts and their wallets and help this area recover. It's a level of devastation. Somebody said it even surpasses what happened around the nuclear power plant in Japan when they got hit by a storm. So if you can help, we know that it's going to be appreciated. This morning, I attended our County Employees Black History Month program, and the theme this year was Black Resistance, and it featured three prominent civil rights activists. Tina Clark, a local historian and civil rights activist who protested against the segregation policies at Glen Echo Park. Joan Mulholland, who is a civil rights icon and former freedom rider, and Willie Kinn, who was a former secretary to Dr. Martin Luther King at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It's important that our employees were able to listen to these women who were at the epicenter of modern Black history. I want to thank Jim Stowe and the Office of Human Rights for putting on this program and our employees who participated in it. Black History Month isn't just about where we have been, it's also a moment to reflect on where we are and where we're going as a county, state, and nation. And one thing that's certain is that almost 60 years beyond the creation of the civil rights landmark legislation that everybody was so proud of, we are still not where we collectively as a society need to be. I grew up in a time of overt racism, views that were likely shared by most white people, certainly by most kids in the classes I was in. And we know the kids get their views from the parents when you're 11 or 12 years old. Otherwise, the bars to education or opportunity that existed then would not have existed. If that wasn't sanctioned by the community, we would have dismantled this a long time ago. Our inability to deal with racism has left a burden on society. And now we actually have governors who want to erase the history of slavery, Jim Crow laws, legally sanctioned segregation, and resistance to extending full rights to Black citizens, including extending even to the right to vote. Their actions are nothing short of disgraceful and ignorant, but their desire to actually manufacture ignorance in the general population by denying what happened in America and removing it from our history is frankly dangerous. Public schools and education are supposed to be leveling forces that, among other things, help correct views like racism that may be held popularly, but have no basis in fact in reality. And turning schools into a lie factory that serves a white racist agenda is a stunningly bad idea. For our part, it's time for us to recognize those individuals who have been making contributions today and that will be making history tomorrow. And our guest this week is one of those people. Montgomery County Delegate Janelle Wilkins is chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, of Maryland and the first Black person from Montgomery County to hold that position. I wanted to share with you some of the priorities that the Black Caucus is working on and their goals for this year's General Assembly session that will impact our state and the county. If our state is to succeed, we must ensure that Black Marylanders are thriving. That's what the Legislative Black Caucus is committed to, and I'm happy to support their efforts. I'll now turn it over to Chair Wilkins to talk to you about their priorities, and then she'll take any questions you might have before she has to go and resume the briefing. So Chair Wilkins, it's now yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. County Executive, for the invitation to join you today. Thank you for your team for putting this together, and also greetings to the members of the media who are here. Again, I am Delegate Janelle Wilkins. I represent District 20, which is the Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, White Oak areas of Montgomery County. And I am proud to be the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland, which is the largest Black caucus in the entire country. We have 64 members, and our strength is not only in our membership, which, by the way, in the House, you need 71 votes to pass a bill, and 50 of the members of the House are members of the Black Caucus. We also have 5 committee chairs who are members of the Legislative Black Caucus, including Montgomery County's own Will Smith, who is my senator. And we are really proud to have a number of leadership roles throughout the legislature. I was also recently appointed to be the vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee, which is responsible for issues and bills dealing with revenue and taxes, gaming, education, and election law. In terms of the Legislative Black Caucus, we were really excited to release our priorities a couple of weeks ago. Our priorities include Black wealth, improving Black health outcomes, the cannabis legalization, housing access, and also education equity. And I'll talk very briefly about each of those. I am particularly excited about our work dealing with health, and in particular, the fact that African Americans are more likely than any other group to die after a cancer diagnosis. And we would like to change that here in the state of Maryland. One of the major challenges is access to diagnostic testing and treatment that is actually affordable. And two of our bills are going to ensure that not only will the screenings be free, but that there are no or very few cost barriers when it comes to accessing follow-up tests. It's one thing to say that someone can come in and get screened. It's another thing for them to have access, if there's an abnormality, to be able to have those follow-ups. And so our work around cancer disparities and health will be really life-saving this legislative session. Also, on the issue of housing, I'm introducing a bill that is a top priority for the Black Caucus that deals with vouchers. It creates a statewide voucher program. We know in Montgomery County, we have a lot of people on the wait list waiting for a federal voucher. We're looking to put $15 million in for a state program that reflects the federal program, but it's state dollars, where we will be able to get people off of the waiting list and for them to be issued vouchers using a state funds and a state voucher program. Working on that with Delegate Vaughn Stewart and with Chairman Guy Gazzone from Budget and Tax. On the issue of building wealth, we want to protect our MBE programs, our minority businesses, and support them to be able to be successful. There are a number of programs that are going to be just naturally repealed because they have an end date on them. And we're looking to make sure that those programs continue. We are working very aggressively with our former county executive, Ike Leggett, who's a part of the accountability board under the blueprint when it comes to education, to ensure that the blueprint is implemented with oversight and fidelity, but also to support the governor's effort around teacher shortages and recruiting diverse teachers when it comes to our workforce. And we know that's an important issue for Montgomery County as well. And so I've touched on health, I've touched on wealth, I've touched on housing, education equity, and the last issue that we are focused in on is the cannabis legalization. On Friday, an 88-page bill was dropped which is sponsored by several members of the Black Caucus in the House and the Senate. It is a great start, but we do have some really critical improvements that we need to make to ensure equity in our cannabis reform effort. Now that cannabis is being legalized, ensuring that the access to the licenses for Black businesses is there, ensuring that also when it comes to criminalization with people who are interacting with the police does not take place. We want to expand expungements, end the practice of stopping and searching people because of odor of marijuana, and several other reforms that we're looking at. So that's the quick overview of Legislative Black Caucus priorities. Again, I'm very proud to be the chair and the first chair of the Black Caucus from Maryland. We've been around for over 50 years, and we are the voice of Black Marylanders in the legislature. I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you again to the county executive for including me today.
Thank you, Chair Wilkins, for joining us today. Members of the media, if you have any questions for the chair right now, this is your time. Use the chat or raise your hand. We'll give you a second or two.
Sorry, Lorna, can I jump in here?
Yes, go ahead, Steve Bonnell, Mocha 360. Good afternoon, Steve.
Good afternoon. Delegate Wilkins, glad to speak with you again. I just want to talk more about the state voucher bill that you mentioned. I apologize, I'll read the bill shortly, but the 15 million, I guess just to start off, can you just take me through how you landed at that number as an upfront investment kind of to get to people who need this? If that makes sense.
Sure. We are working on this bill with a number of partners throughout the state. And the way that we arrived at the $15 million is that we basically have an average, I think it was about $1,400, the average cost of rent throughout the state. And so we kind of worked backwards in terms of what is an affordable amount that we would be able to start this program at in terms of state funding, and how many people do we think that we would be able to get off the rolls with an average rent. Now, being from Montgomery County, I also recognize that rent is a little higher in our area. But with this being statewide, we pretty much found the average, which I can get to you. I want to make sure I give you the right number. I can get to you at a later time. And I think just under 1,000 people is who we believe we would be able to impact throughout the state. Now, we won't be able to clear the rolls. We wish that we could. That would take significantly more resources, but we think that we'll be able to make a small dent across the state with an initial investment of $15 million.
And I might have to follow up on this, but in terms of the average voucher that goes out to people who need them, do you know what that is, or even roughly, or?
So right now, it's a federal program, and federal funds that administered through programs like our HOC, administered locally, like our HOC in Montgomery County. So I would have to double check with them in terms of the federal program that they're running, their average amount of a voucher.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any more questions for Chair Wilkins from members of the media? Going once? Going twice? No more questions? Thank you, Chair Wilkins, for joining us this afternoon, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. County Executive.
Thank you. And I'll see you again next week when I'm down in Annapolis. And I look forward to continuing to support your agenda and the Black Caucus's agenda during this year. So thank you for all the work you're doing for all of us.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
So speaking of the General Assembly session, yesterday I was in Annapolis and I was testifying in front of the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee on property tax changes, and pushing for the kind of, these are income tax changes, pushing for the kind of reforms that will help us build a stronger Maryland. And at the core of this is some pretty simple legislation. Montgomery County, I think, as most of you know, you pay a county tax on top of the state tax. And it used to be progressive. And then 20 years ago, Montgomery County wound up with a flat rate, and we're at 3.2%, and we're at the top of that rate. And it causes some problems because the legislature last year passed a bill that allowed counties to introduce progressivity by having brackets inside the 3.2. So some groups at lower incomes could be taxed at a lower rate, but it would not be revenue neutral in the 8 counties that are at the maximum rate of 3.2%. So you couldn't be progressive without actually losing revenue, which is not something the county is in a position to be able to do. So we've asked, and MACO, which is the association representing all counties, asked for legislation that would allow counties to increase the maximum to 3.7%. Now, it does not mean that people raise it to 3.7, but it puts a cap on where it might go, much as 3.2 used to be the cap. And counties can only do this if they decrease taxes on those with lower incomes, and it can only be done on incomes that are much higher than the average income in the county. So passing this bill would require us to reduce taxes on people who could use their taxes reduced, and it would limit it only to the highest of the income earners, not the general public. And we'd like to have the ability to do that, frankly, for progressivity. But the other issue we're going to deal with is that all of us know that when the blueprint got passed for Kerwin, that there's an expectation that all jurisdictions are going to wind up putting more money into schools. Just the wage requirement alone, where teacher salaries are going to have to rise to $60,000 a year as a minimum, as a start, which is not much money when you think about it, that's going to be a burden for a lot of counties. Even Montgomery County is significantly below $60,000 a year, which gives you an idea of where the people who are teaching your children are starting at. So if we're going to have to deal with Kerwin and we do not have any flexibility on the income tax side, then the only place the county can go is property taxes, which is even more inequitable than dealing with income taxes. So we're trying to give ourselves some flexibility so we could build a more progressive and less onerous structure, so that whether it's equity in the current circumstances where we can live within our limits, or where we might need to go above the limit to ensure we can both maintain equity and draw resources from those who are most able to pay, and also be able to address what we know are going to be the requirements of the blueprint legislation for education. So that was our thinking. Montgomery County is already one of the lowest tax jurisdictions in the region. And so implementing this is not going to hurt our competitiveness, and it's going to allow us to provide more services in a more equitable manner. I should have had us put this in here today, but there's a chart we've been sharing with people where we've been talking about competitiveness, and the District of Columbia does this biannual assessment of residential tax burdens for the region and an annual assessment, I think, on commercial tax burdens. It will surprise you all to know that the lowest residential tax burdens are in the District of Columbia. The second lowest in the entire region are Montgomery County. And the only reason the District of Columbia is lower is because their property tax on residential property is 85 cents. Ours is 99. Their tax on commercial property is $1.85. So picture all the commercial property in downtown DC, and our tax on commercial property is 99 cents. So they're able to fund a lot more off their commercial property taxes that we're funding off of residential taxes. And but for that, we'd be the lowest. But being the second lowest in this region is pretty good. And on the business side, we are the lowest tax burden jurisdiction in the entire DC region. Lowest. I want to emphasize the word lowest. So this idea that we're somehow the worst taxed is just simply not true. I will say that, if you were a developer, we have one tax which is in the wrong place, and Virginia has a similar tax in terms of revenue that it raises, but it raises it in the right place. And I've been trying to get the county to adopt a system that parallels Virginia's system, which is much less onerous and makes a lot more sense. And hopefully sometime this year, we'll make some progress on that. I want to thank our delegation chair, Julie Polakovich-Carr, for being the sponsor of this bill and fighting for equity in our tax structure. And this week, we also heard from President Joe Biden in his State of the Union address, and he touched on many topics, but he weaved in throughout his speech was a focus on the economy. And he said, we're building an economy where no one is left behind. He said, from that sentence, there's a focus on equity, on what's fair, and developing a plan that works for most people. Earlier this week, Council President Evan Glass introduced an economic development plan for the county. I look forward to working with him and the county council on ways to enhance our economic development efforts. But I want everybody to know and be clear about this. We're not starting from zero. Montgomery County is the economic engine of the state. We have revamped the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation along with WorkSource Montgomery. And we're about to launch a new county's business center program that will finish something that we started before COVID and COVID interrupted, which is the provisioning of business services out in the community closest to the small businesses that need those services. We have expedited approvals in our permitting department. We've made progress. There are still a couple of big obstacles I'm trying to remove, but for the most part, we're making progress. And we've looked at our regulatory environment to move what we think are unnecessary regulations, and we're continuing to do that work. And I'm glad that the council president highlighted that as work that we need to do. From our booming life sciences industry, the rebound of our hospitality sector, to our support for startups, entrepreneurs, small, local, veteran, and women and minority business, we're beginning to see progress on all of these fronts. And the county president's roadmap fits well with our existing efforts to continue to grow our economy and create jobs for our residents. I want to talk a little bit about planning. This is one area that we could absolutely improve that will help us grow our economy and help Montgomery County become more business friendly. And that's in our planning process. It was not long ago, I had a conversation with somebody from the Board of Supervisors in Fairfax County, along with someone from one of our business consultants that focuses primarily on commercial real estate. And what came through loud and clear, and it's been raised for a number of years, is that the length of time it takes to get through the planning process in Montgomery County is onerous. It is probably one of the worst in the region. And length of time matters because if you're carrying a project, say if you own the piece of raw land, then you have to carry it an extra year or two. You just added a year or two of interest on land to the cost of doing the project. And you've also added the cost of inflation into the cost of building the project. And if the county's not getting a benefit, if we're not getting better services or a better plan or a more affordable project out of it, by the time we spend trying to get these things through the approval process, if we're not getting benefits and all we're doing is making it more expensive and time consuming, we really need to take a look at it. And that's what I've been trying to do. So this week, together with Montgomery County House Delegation and Chair of the Planning Board, we signed a letter of intent to create a work group on a county's development review process. Over the last 4 years, our county's competitiveness has soared with a lot of the things we've done in terms of record private investment, booming life sciences industry, and hospitality. But like I said before, we keep coming back to how long it takes to get through our processes in Montgomery County, and it remains a problem. When I was on the county council, we talked about this. We attempted to find ways to remedy it. We were stunningly unsuccessful. We nibbled around the edges. We were making a little bit of progress, but we were not able to do the things we do. Montgomery County has a unique system for approving things. No other jurisdiction in the state does what we do, and none of our competitors in the region do what we do. So we're not asking for anything radical. We're not asking for anything that's going to be onerous. We're asking for things that will actually reduce costs and time, which I thought was a goal that was shared by the county council, and I hope is still a goal shared by the county council. But if we're looking for red tape and we're looking for problems, we don't have to look any farther than this one process, which makes us more difficult to deal with than anybody else in the region. We can fix it. This isn't a commentary on the people who do the work or the structures that they operate under. This is not a planning board problem. It's just simply the fact the way the institution evolved and the way authorities were parsed out that changed the nature of what Montgomery County does to something very different from what other people do. Like I said, we've bemoaned this for a long time. We've got the opportunity to make some changes. And we believe that instead of the executive branch or planning continuing to work in a vacuum, that both of us who are responsible for both creating and then executing these plans should try to come together and come up with a system that expedites that process. I believe we can do it. As I said, nobody else is as convoluted, slow, and costly as we are, and that is nothing to be proud of. We've got plenty of models for other jurisdictions. You could literally pick their models off a shelf and replicate them in Montgomery County. And we'd increase the speed and reduce the cost of these processes. None of it involves cutting out citizen input or feedback from the community. This is simply a battle between two approval agencies that is being waged at great cost to people who have actually no interest in the battle and just like to build things. And I've talked to the development community. I know that they share these concerns. They'd like to see them fixed too. And you know, anybody who's listening to this knows I don't always align with them on all issues. But where our processes add time and cost with no benefit to the community, we really ought to fix it. And that's what I'm pushing to do. I'm grateful to Chair Lopez, Chair Polakovich-Carr, Senator Ben Cramer, and the members of the House delegation for working with us on this issue. And I'm looking forward to working with our planning colleagues to continue to improve our processes. I assure everybody, the planning board will remain intact. I'm not looking for the county executive's office to take over the planning board, despite silly things that some people say. We want to make sure we get this right, and we ought to focus on Montgomery County's economic competitiveness and not on trying to politicize everything that comes across the plate. Also this week, Governor Moore's first bills were introduced in the State House, and we're supporting a number of them, including the SERVE Act, which would establish a new program allowing high school graduates to offer a year of service in their local community. This will help our young people without immediate college plans on what interests them, but also give them a chance for our nonprofit communities to get a huge benefit from their work and the opportunities that should be available to them. We think this is a big deal. We know a lot of kids, too many kids, leave high school not going to college, which in itself wouldn't be a bad thing if they were prepared to work. But if you're not going to college and you're not prepared to work and don't have the skills, it puts you in a very difficult situation. And I know Governor Moore's plan here is to help provide a year that can help provide guidance and orientation to people, particularly our young people, and help prepare them for entry into the workforce. The Clean Energy and Transportation Act would expand an initiative statewide, which I'm also proud to have already launched here in Montgomery County, and that's to boost state incentives for municipalities to add charging stations so they can retire diesel work trucks, replace them with electric vehicles. This county is also working on hydrogen vehicles with support from a very large federal grant. So we are looking for the appropriate power source for the appropriate vehicle, and we're very happy to be on the front end of this. The governor's broadband expansion incentive act would make getting online more affordable for everyone. And here in the county, there's been a widespread effort for a year now to get grant-funded laptops into the families at no cost to them. We're literally putting out tens of thousands of laptops into the communities so that their families and the children can take advantage of access to the internet. You know, the digital divide is a real impact on education, because if you go home and you don't have a computer, or you're trying to share a signal with a phone on a computer, your access to the internet is pretty limited. And if you have to do research, which is increasingly expected for people to do using the internet, these kids are at a real disadvantage. So getting computers and internet access into all homes in Montgomery County is something that really helps us deal with equity issues and helps improve students' ability to get the information that they need. And just this morning, Governor Moore, Speaker Jones, and Senate President Ferguson and Delegate Ariana Kelly acted to ensure that access to reproductive rights, women health resources are protected in the state. But this is an effort I greatly support, but I'm saddened that we live in a day and age like civil rights problems that we have to legislatively fight for the due right of women to have the right to choose against this another horrible Supreme Court decision last year involving the Dobbs ruling. So we're glad that the state's a partner in this and is going to support putting this into the Constitution of the state so that it cannot be eroded by people who do not respect women's rights. We're also looking forward to a future with great hope, and I'm looking for ways to improve our communities, not just get them back to where they were pre-pandemic. Pre-pandemic was in some ways better than where we are now, but pre-pandemic for a lot of people in the community still meant a lot of folks were mired in poverty and lack of opportunity. So this is an opportunity now for us to get beyond where we were and move into a new space. And I got to tell you, having a governor that's a partner makes a real difference in this. We speak a similar language, share common goals, and we know they're shared across the legislature. We're not going to be dealing with having to pass legislation and then have to repass it over a governor's veto. So there's a lot of good things I think are coming forward from Montgomery County and the state. This week, I met with Senator Ben Cardin about several important issues, including transportation issues around WMATA safety and our county's growing bus rapid transit program. In addition, we discussed some of the critical economic drivers in the county, and particularly our project UM3IHC, which, if everybody's forgotten this acronym, is the partnership between the University of Maryland system for the creation of an Institute for Health Computing, which will be located in the North Bethesda, White Flint station area. And it's going to allow us to work with the University of Maryland. And there's a real focus on using artificial intelligence to reduce health disparities, as well as using artificial intelligence to advance drug discovery and treatments. We also discussed the county's bid for the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, also known as ARPA-H. And together with the County Council and MCEDC, we're taking every step necessary to attract this important federal agency to the county, which would be an asset to the county, but more importantly, to the country. It's very likely the agency will have multiple homes, and we want Montgomery County to be one of the landing places for one of those homes. And we think the logic of this county kind of speaks for itself. We're number 4 in the nation in life sciences. When you look at the industry, we're number 2 in the nation. When you look at the workforce, headquartering ARPA-H in this critical life science hub where COVID vaccines were created, and frankly, where the DNA revolution originated, is going to allow us to provide the talent and growth for the country and for the world. So we're excited about potentially having a role to play in this, and optimistic about our chances to actually get ARPA-H. I appreciated the Senator's visit and his continued support and advocacy on the bills, laws, and issues that matter most to Montgomery County. As our state senior senator and senior member of the county's congressional delegation, his experience, as well as his position as chairman of the Small Business Subcommittee, is a great benefit to Montgomery County residents and businesses. As for our public health update this week, I'm going to start just talking about the problem of drug use, and particularly fentanyl use, and the increase of overdoses by adolescents. There have been 5 young people under the age of 21 who've died from overdoses since the start of the school year. One major reason is fentanyl. It's an illegal drug that's been in the community for several years now, and it's now being found in pill form, and it's being used in counterfeit pills as a substitute for prescription drugs. So in many cases, the kids don't even know what they're getting. They think they're buying one substance, but they shouldn't be buying, but the substance is actually laced with fentanyl. And it makes it easier to hide and easier to use, but worse than that, it's actually more dangerous than the pills they think they're using. And it's not good. The kids don't know what they're getting into, and we need to continue up upgrade the amount of education and awareness that's built into the community and also with the students. The DEA's top administrator called fentanyl the single deadliest drug threat our nation's ever encountered. And while other pills offer a brief high, fentanyl has the power and potential to kill even a first-time user. One MCPD leader says youth overdoses year to year are up over more than 400%. So that's a significant increase. And there would be a lot more deaths were it not for Narcan. There are almost 40 deaths that were avoided by Narcan. And if we hadn't had that, and we're increasingly making it available, there would have even been more loss of life. So we're fighting this, and we know the community is engaged and the school system's engaged. We encourage everybody to pay attention to what you see out there. And frankly, if you're a kid and you know somebody who's dealing fentanyl, let us know. Your immunity, your privacy is always going to be respected. But this is really killing people. And if you know somebody who's putting this substance in the hands of children, we need to know about it. So please help us. I want to thank Councilmember Gabe Albornoz for creating a PSA in Spanish about the dangers of fentanyl. And over the past weeks, we've heard from many of our Latino families that they need more information and resources about it. And we're going to be conducting some upcoming Spanish language town halls with our Health and Human Services Department that will include Narcan demonstrations and substance misuse resources. MCPS and Montgomery County Goes Purple are also planning their next community forum. We want anyone at any age in any community in our county who's dealing with drug addiction and misuse to contact the Montgomery County Crisis Center. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the phone number is 240-777-4000. And I just want you to know that we're looking in the next budget to find ways to expand health services and mental health services into the community. As far as COVID goes, these briefings will thankfully be getting shorter as this continues to evolve, hopefully in the direction it's going now. We're seeing an upside of dealing with an early flu season. Cases have dropped significantly now from the flu, which has a positive impact on COVID-19 status in our hospitals, which is a long way of saying hospital occupancy is going down. And that's one of the indicators that we have in terms of evaluating how dangerous the situation is with COVID. COVID sends more people to the hospital, but flu was an unnecessary additive, as was RSV. So having to deal with all three at the same time has created a lot of stress. COVID community level now is low, with hospitalizations and cases both declining overall. And that eases the stress on the hospitals that went through 2 months in alert or warning mode. And we've talked to you about the problem with ambulances not being able to take their patients and get them admitted into emergency rooms because of the overload. So that's easing, and that's going to help contribute to more rapid healthcare for the people who need it most. We're going to remain vigilant in our approach. There are no new variants spreading through the community with anything appearing to be a threat right now. So we've got the cases that we've got the variants that we have, but nothing on the horizon immediately anyway appears to be another threat like XBB was. So getting the best bivalent booster is still the best way to protect yourself from serious illness. There's a real difference in who gets sick and how sick you get between those who are boosted and those who aren't. We only have 34% of the eligible county residents who've received the bivalent booster. And these numbers are even lower when it comes to younger adults and those in our Black and Latino communities. And right now, our bivalent booster rates are a third of what they were at the beginning of December, and they're decreasing. So we're still encouraging people to get boosted. Over the last 3 months, COVID has been over 850% more deadly than the flu. There are people out there who want you to believe, oh, it's just like the flu now. 850% more deadly is not just like the flu. It's different from the flu. It's a virus we can't simply ignore because we want our rates to go down. And just because our rates are going down it's still not where we need to be. And we know the virus is going to continue to mutate, which is why we're going to continue to keep you posted on what's happening. Hopefully the news will be no new mutations on the horizon, but as they do occur, or when they do occur, we'll be sure you know what we're doing about it and what we're learning from it. As we prepare our 24 budget, we're looking closely what we're going to need financially to deal with COVID with less help from the federal government. I know we all have heard that they plan on ending the federal involvement at any degree like it is today in May. But the key words from the president, or the key words from the situation, is there's going to be less help, but not no help. And President Biden was very specific in the State of the Union when he said we still need to monitor dozens of variants and support new vaccines and treatments. So Congress needs to fund these efforts if they're going to keep America safe. And so we're going to play our part in keeping people aware of this. And I'm going to turn it over now to Sean O'Donnell for his report.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. So I'll try to be brief here, as the county executive has shared a lot of encouraging news from across the COVID and respiratory disease front. We have not seen a significant change in the variants in our region. The XBB continues to make up most of our cases at this time. Again, you can see as we track our emergency department volume, you see that it's come down over the last few weeks, and we're encouraged by that, lessening the burden at our hospitals, and the overall hospital numbers are coming down. More significantly, roughly half of the patients that have been at the alternate care site receiving longer-term COVID rehabilitation have left over the last few weeks. We're down to 55 patients there. And our overall hospitalizations with COVID diagnoses continue to trend down. Looking at all types of flu-like illnesses, including COVID, RSV, other respiratory illnesses, you can see that while we've had some sustained decrease in other age groups, we have finally started to see our 65+ numbers come down. Again, the cycle of infection throughout families and gatherings, they seem to be the ones who had the more of a holiday bump in cases, and that has started to come down. It's still elevated, though. Will likely still be elevated through February. We mentioned last week, and again, we'll continue to watch the data that the CDC is collecting from more than 300 hospitals across the nation, again, showing and tracking the effectiveness of the bivalent booster versus other vaccination levels and unvaccinated levels. Here's the data, again, from the 65+ population, as well as from our 18 to 49 population. Again, showing across the board, you're roughly 3 times more likely to be hospitalized if you've been vaccinated for COVID but haven't gotten the bivalent booster than if you've gotten that bivalent booster. Again, pretty compelling to go and get it. As our county executive pointed out, our bivalent booster rates, that's the lower right, significantly lower than our initial vaccination rates, which are above, and unfortunately showing even greater disparities than we experience with other vaccinations, especially at the lower age groups. And this is why we're trying to illustrate that those risks, even though the risk of hospitalization is lower for the younger people, it's still significantly elevated over those people who got a bivalent booster. So we're not just recommending these for our seniors, we're recommending the bivalent booster for everyone. Again, our influenza rates, as we've discussed, have come down significantly, including the hospitalizations within Maryland. And we had 2 additional deaths across the state of Maryland to report over the last 2 weeks. So again, we're happy to see influenza rates come down significantly. We are tracking news stories that are coming from or information coming out from our federal partners and our state partners as to the plans post the end of the public health emergency declaration in May. We're following on with guidance from the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare, and we'll continue to share that with you all as we get further information about how it will affect resource availability. Again, there's some indication that that vaccine costs may transfer over to insurance companies and to individuals after that date. So until we get that officially declared, right now, we're encouraging people to go out and get the vaccines now while the cost of that is being covered by the federal government. You only need one bivalent booster for COVID, so please come out and get that. At this point, I'd like to see if Dr. Bridgers has anything he'd like to add.
Thanks, Sean. Good afternoon, all. Nothing else to add. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers, Mr. O'Donnell, and Mr. County Executive. Dr. Stoddard, do you have any? No? All right, so we are going to open it up right now for the Q&A portion of the presentation. Members of the media, any questions for the officials at this time?
Sorry, Lorna, can I jump in again?
Yes, go ahead, Steve Bonnell, Moco 360.
Sorry for the background noise here. I'm in the coffee shop, but this is for the county executive. The county council recently passed a bill that Andrew Friedson sponsored, kind of tweaking the potential for co-location of affordable housing in the county on land. Has that bill gone to your desk yet? If you're aware of that, I just want to follow up on that because I knew earlier in the week I heard it hadn't gotten to you yet. You're muted, sir.
So I haven't seen it yet, but like most bills, they just go into effect without a signature because I don't have to sign everything for it to go into effect. So it's going to go. I mean, I don't have a problem with the bill. We already do all the work that the bill stated. All it does is change when they want to see the delivery date of the information. So I'll just say that, we do it anyway. It doesn't change what we do. It will change the date. This is probably an example of something where the date could have been changed. It's just somebody had asked us to move the delivery of the information up sooner because it would have been helpful to them. And we could have just complied with that, but happy to do it. And but I just want to assure everybody nothing really changes.
Right. I know you. I've always said that 16 or 17 county lots you put out for bid to kind of encourage affordable housing. Have you gotten? I think you said you've gotten bids back.
Yeah.
I just want to know what the update on those are and kind of where we are in that process.
We're continuing to evaluate the bids. We've already told our folks to go ahead and negotiate with some of the bidders that have made proposals. I'm pretty happy with the breadth of what's been coming in. So hopefully we'll continue to make progress on this. But it was pretty well received.
Can you say at least where in the county generally more projects might pop up, if that makes sense? So I imagine these lots are spread across the county.
Yeah, they're spread across. I mean, there's a bunch of lots in Bethesda. There are lots in Silver Spring. There are lots in Wheaton, and there are a couple of green spaces that we own that were close to roads and close to transit. We also put into the hopper.
To be a broken record, though, is any of those Bethesda, Silver Spring, are all of those kind of at the top of the list in terms of where there might first be movement?
The first movement will be based on the people who responded and as we go through it. But our hope is that we get a viable offer on every one of the projects, and we'll move every one of the projects.
And you said roughly how many bids? This is all probably public, and I look it up. I apologize, but how many bids per site? You said you got dozens per site, I think, a couple months ago, or just the volume of bids they came.
We have, for most sites, we have multiple bids, multiple proposals. And so when we evaluate it, we look at it in terms of what provides the most affordable housing, which ones provide the largest range of affordable housing, In other words, I'm not interested in things that only provide MPDUs, which exclude people who don't make enough and exclude people who make too much but don't make enough to afford existing rental housing, particularly new rental housing in the county. It's one of the things that when you examine Bethesda, it's become really clear. If you're a person trying to get into Bethesda, first place, if you're a family, the developers aren't building anything that serves families, except for stunningly expensive units. So there's nothing for normal human beings at the family level being built. There are some 2-bedroom units, 1 bedroom is predominant. So we're looking to get a bigger mix in terms of the bedrooms, and we're looking for a bigger mix in terms of affordability. So we want to serve people who make too much to afford an MPDU, but not enough to get into a market. And we want to serve people who make too little to afford an MPDU and can't get into the market. I think people would be stunned to know that most lower income people aren't served by our nationally vaunted moderately priced dwelling unit program. And that's why when we're going to propose a set of changes, and we want to, basically rename this in the sense of creating a complete communities housing program rather than an MPDU program, because we've got to start thinking when and planning's never done this, but when you're like planning a Bethesda, you've got to plan for everybody to be able to live in Bethesda, not just for developers to build high-rise units, house the incredibly wealthy people, and then have a smattering of affordable units and say, this is how you plan a community. It is absolutely not how you plan a community. We've done too much of it, and we've got to figure out how to walk some of this back. Just to be fun.
Sorry, sir, but I know we talked about that those MPDU changes. Do you know broadly when you're going to bring that to the council? And then a similar question about, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but for these lots, wherever there might be first movement, where bids might be accepted for some of these lots, if you follow what I'm asking.
There's no order in which they're accepted geographically. We put out, I guess, the 18 or 19 properties. We put them out in 2 tranches. So some proposals came in later than others because we couldn't do everything at once. And so we're going through the first stack of proposals and the second stack of proposals. There's no prioritization. Theoretically, all these projects could be done in a year or in very short time. I mean, done in the sense of we could identify who's going to actually do the development. So we are not backed up for time. It's just a matter of how quickly we evaluate the proposals and then negotiate deals, because you start with a proposal and you move from a proposal to a deal. That's what we're going to do.
And then, sorry, the MPDU changes you hope to bring to the council in the next few months, or you've probably told me already, but
we've been tied. We've obviously been tied up. We've been working with council members on rent stabilization and trying to come up with something that has enough support to pass and that addresses different concerns the council members have. So we've been working on this, and that's been kind of like the #1 priority. This other legislation is a little bit easier because it doesn't affect the rental issues, which are that probably have more of an audience. I think expanding what's affordable should be a no-brainer for everybody.
all right. No, thank you, sir, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Steve. Any more questions for the officials from members of the media? No more questions? Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. Stay safe. We'll see you again next time. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.